Hello, my name is Karlo, and today I will be giving a presentation about sexual selection intended for the 4th grade of biology. I will be covering the importance of sexual selection as a force of evolution, as well as Bateman's principle and the theory of parental investment. I will also be going over the different types of sexual selection and the examples in living species today. At the end, I will also go over some examples from the fossil record to show that extinct species also had a remarkable degree of sexual selection. The theory of sexual selection was first proposed by Charles Darwin in his book The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. It was later improved by Ronald Aylmer Fisher, who was a geneticist and a mathematician. It is a type of natural selection wherein a species aims to increase its reproductive success, that being the ability to create viable offspring which would reproduce and therefore increase the parent's fitness. It results in the evolution of sexual dimorphism, which are morphological differences between two sexes. On the picture, in the picture on the bottom left, we see a male orangutan right here, and a female orangutan with her child on the right. Now notice how the male orangutan has this developed facial crest, while the female is much smaller and lacks this crest. Well, this is an example of sexual dimorphism. Bateman's principle states that the reproductive success variance of the male population in a certain species will be much greater than that of the female population. This is due to the fact that sperm cells are easier to make than egg cells. So what does this mean? This means that in a certain population there will be a select number of dominant males, while the rest will have a much lower reproductive success or a non-existent one. This means that the dominant males will get to pass on their genes, while the others have a limited ability to do so or no chance at all. By this logic, the female population has ensured partners to help sire their offspring and procreate. This means that their reproductive success variance in that population will be much lower, because all females will get to mate with the dominant males. The parental investment theory states that the sex which gives more investment into their offspring gets to be more choosy or discriminant while selecting their partner. Because of Bateman's principle, this is usually the female. There are several parental structures that should be noted, one being monoparental, where one parent gives all of the investment. This parent gets to be choosy and will usually not have any kinds of ornaments or attractive morphology on it. The biparental structure sees both parents giving an equal amount of investment into their offspring. This will usually result in both parents having some kind of ornament with which it can be used to attract one another. I also have to mention the alloparental structure, which sees a random member of the population, which is usually closely genetically related to another parent's offspring, and sees it engage in a monoparental structure, but the offspring is not its own. It's actually protecting the offspring of another parent. This is beneficial to that indirect parent because it is usually guarding an offspring which has a related genome to its own. So therefore this kind of behavior can be passed on. Male elephant seals will establish harems, and this species exhibits a monoparental structure. The males, which have this enormous nose which gives them their name, arrive in spring on beaches and fight for the best territories where most females will arrive. And later in the year when they arrive, they will establish their harem, and the male will mate with all of the females in his harem, leaving them to care for their children on their own. The crested auklets exhibit a biparental structures where both give an equal amount of investment. And as I've said before, we can observe that both of them have attractive ornaments. As you can see, these modified feathers are in the front of their beaks. There are several types of sexual selection, and they can be grouped into two major categories. One being precopulatory, that being occurring before sex, and postcopulatory, occurring during sex or after sex. The first type is intersexual selection, which is the competition between individuals of the same species of the same sex. It usually results in the evolution of larger body sizes for males or ornaments such as horns, which can be used for fighting. These two deer are engaging in a fighting competition by interlocking their horns, while the aforementioned elephant seals at the bottom are fighting for the best spots on the beach, usually engaging in bloody battles by bashing their bodies together and scratching at each other with their teeth. The second type of precopulatory selection is the intersexual selection, wherein the opposing sex chooses a satisfactory mate, that being usually the female that gets to choose. There is an interesting evolutionary mechanism called runaway selection, which I will cover later, as well as the cryptic female choice. On the postcopulatory side, we have anatomical mating plugs. On the cellular level, we have sperm competition, and as a behavioral strategy, we have the guarding of the mate, as well as postcopulatory cryptic female choice. As I've stated at the start of the presentation, Darwin's theory of sexual selection was further improved by Ronald Aylmer Fisher, who incorporated mathematics into his research and developed the theory of runaway selection, or Fisherian runaway. It is an evolutionary mechanism and a positive feedback loop wherein extreme male sexual dimorphism, which usually defies logic of natural selection at first glance, is caused by directional and persistent female choice. Such would be the example of the male peacock's wonderfully ornamented and enormous tails, as seen on the picture at the top. There are several theories for how runaway selection can occur in evolution, but there are two main models. The first being good genes and the other being the sexy sons hypothesis. In both of these hypotheses involve males evolving some random arbitrary trait, while the females evolve a preference for that trait at the same time. This is where the similarities end. In the good genes hypothesis, we go by the handicap principle, which is based on the fact that the traits which these males are developing usually impede their survival and go against natural selection at first glance. For example, the ornamented tails and the large tails of the male peacocks makes it harder for them to fly and makes them easier to spot by predators. But because of the fact that the males are surviving, although they have these kinds of handicaps, signals that the genes for strength, endurance, and their metabolism have a very high quality. In the sexy sons hypothesis, however, it is much more simple, because the attractive male offspring will increase the chances that the sons will pass on the mother's genes because they are so attractive. In the good genes hypothesis, the good genes of the father will benefit both the male and the female offspring of the mother, while the sexy sons hypothesis has the good genes from the father, or the sexy genes from the father, only benefit the female's son. So the female should prefer and prioritize its male offspring because it will it will increase its fitness the most. A 2009 meta-analysis of over 90 different scientific articles concluded that there is more overall evidence for the sexy sons model, which is more in line with Fisher's original idea. In intersexual selection, there is the phenomenon of the lek, which is a mating display arena where males congregate and attract mates. There are two types, the classical and the exploded. The classical lek can be seen, for example, in a species of greater sage grouse. This type of lek is formed by having alpha males congregate at the center of the circle, while the males which are lesser in rank will surround the alpha male. This is a useful evolutionary strategy for both the alpha male and the lower ranking males, because a larger cluster of males will attract more females. So although the lesser ranked males are attracting more females for the alpha males, they will also have an increased chance of finding a mate themselves if there are more females in the area. So it's useful for both the alpha males and the lower ranking males. Exploded legs can be observed in the species of New Zealand's kakapo, which is the only flightless parrot in the world and also the fattest flightless parrot in the world. This type of exploded leg is formed by having the males be very far away from each other. They will create burrows, and it functions by them pretty much engaging in a screaming competition in order to be as loud as possible and attract more mates. Named after the leg is the leg paradox, which states that in Fisher and Runaway, the genetic variance of the male population should decrease over time, because the females are giving a directional and purposeful choice for certain traits. During the timeline of evolution, by this logic, all males should have a uniform genome, pretty much be the same. However, this does not occur. There are two solutions that go hand in hand. The first is the gene capture theory, which states that the male sexually dimorphic traits depend on their variance in the genome, and that the variance indicates good health and good fitness. This can be explained by the fact that the male sexually dimorphic genes are actually spread throughout the entire genome on different loci, rather than being focused on a certain part of the genome in loci which are very close together. The other theory is the parasite resistance theory, wherein the coevolution of a host and parasite ensures that the host is constantly developing ways to combat the ever-increasing ability of the parasite to damage its host and overtake it. So the gene flow and the constant mutations that are selected for in this theory ensures that a variance is secured throughout the evolution of the males. In this section of the presentation, I will be going over a family of birds called the birds of paradise, which exhibit a very high degree of sexual dimorphism. On the screen right now, you can see a male Porosha specimen, which is known for its iridescent feathers on its throat, and the elongated, modified feathers on the back of its head, as well as its eyes, which contain a special structure which can be used in mating displays and allows it to change the color of its eyes from blue to bright yellow based on the way that the light is refracting from the eye. This right here is a snippet and only a mere part of the dance that the male is performing in order to attract a female, and the full video can be found on YouTube if you so wish, and I highly recommend that you watch the full performance. A species which shares a common ancestor with the Porosha is the King of Saxony bird of paradise. This can be seen by it also having those very developed feathers near its back of its head, although this one utilizes them more like whips in its performances, as it can be seen on the video on the left. Both of the birds on the screen share a common ancestor, as can be seen by their modified tail feathers, which both have a curly shape to them. The bird on the left is called the king bird of paradise, while the one on the right is Wilson's bird of paradise. As a fun fact, its Latin name, Republica, was given to it by one of Napoleon's descendants in order to honor the republic and not monarchy or royals. As you can see, the trend in naming birds of paradise at the time was like giving them royal names like Regius or Paradisea Ragiana, and all sorts of royal names. Further examples of birds of paradise are Paradisornis rudolfi and Paradisaeidae apoda, which is the type species of its genus. Both of these birds share a common ancestor. As you can see, they have these developed feathers on their wings and backs, right here. But I also want you to note how although they are very closely related, they still look remarkably different. Well, this is just proof for how powerful Fisher and Runaway can be in the race of evolution. The last example from the birds of paradise family I will give is the Lophorina superba species, which is most famous for the males having this very well developed and iridescent chest feathers, which is used in displays, as you can see on the right. Here is a good example of how different the male, the black one, and the very poor looking, very camouflaged female looks. You can see clearly the effects of Fisher and Runaway. By now you should also have noticed how important feathers can be in sexual selection and in Fisher and Runaway. And just hold that in mind because I will cover it later. Moving on to postcopulatory selection. The male garter snakes exhibit a mating strategy wherein they will insert an anatomical mating plug into the copulatory opening of the female in order to reduce possible and potential sperm competition from other males. Therefore, this plug, as you can see on the left, prevents other males from mating with the same female, which increases the chances that the male's sperm will inseminate the female. Another very interesting survival tactic for these snakes is at the end of winter, at the start of spring, when the ice starts to melt and the temperature of the habitat increases. These snakes will start to form these kinds of balls of mating. They will try and find a female in this cluster. And before this cluster is formed, firstly, in order to move efficiently, every single snake in here needs to first raise its body temperature. A strategy used by some males is that they can emit female pheromones in order to trick, for example, males who have woken up earlier than the one emitting female pheromones to attempt to mate with that male. Well, this is actually a trick that this male can use in order to have the body heat of the other males transferred to its own body on contact, therefore accelerating its metabolism and giving it a head start ahead of the other males in order to reach this goal of mating. More examples of mating plugs can be observed in the nephilid spiders. The male nephilid spiders will sever their pedipalps, their frontal appendages, and insert it into the female's copulatory opening, forming a mating plug. This is in support of the male eunuch advantage hypothesis, which states that eunuchs, or the males which have severed their pedipalps, will actually guard their mates better, because it has been observed that those males with less mass, so when they sever their pedipalps, they reduce their mass, they are faster, can also guard their mates better. This behavioral strategy of guarding their mates, including the mating plugs, prevents sperm competition from other males trying to mate with the same female. I would also like to show you how in some species the sexual dimorphism, although very clear to see that the female, for example in Herenia, is much larger than the male, which is currently guarding his mate, the male being the orange one at the top right here. As you can see, he has also severed a single pedipalp, and he only has one left right here, this black bulb. I would like to mention that the male is much smaller than the female, but in some species the dimorphism is even more clear to see and more extreme, where the male is extremely small in relation to the female in a species like Nephila pilipes, for example. If we look at the phylogenetic tree of Nephilid spiders, we can observe that the more basal species like Herenia multipuncta and Nephila fenestrata show a much less pronounced degree of sexually dimorphic size difference. But if we go into the more distal, more diverged and evolutionarily younger species like Nephila clavata, plumipes and pilipes, there is a much more pronounced difference, and it results in extreme female gigantism. It has been observed that males of Herenia multipuncta prefer to plug females which are more aggressive. We can conclude from this that the male sees it as a great investment to plug a female that is very aggressive, although it risks being eaten. However, if we go down the tree into the more distal species, the females have become much larger and the male plugs have become less effective. This leads to the males being much more careful about plugging their mate, because they could risk being eaten, and there is no chance that they could eliminate sperm competition from other males, because their plugs might have been ineffective. So this has resulted in the fact that males have become smaller and the females have become larger over the course of evolution of Nephilid spiders, which results in females being capable of mating with more males, because the plugs of the males are less effective. Moving on to cryptic female choice, on the precopulatory side we have the hidden estrus cycle, or the menstrual cycle, which is present in primates. In most animals, the estrus cycle is not hidden, and the males can detect when a female is fertile. But the benefit of a hidden estrus cycle is that the female can avoid unwanted breeding. And additionally, when it finds a mate, the mate will usually stay with the female for prolonged periods of time and assist the female in procuring food or protection. This is due to the fact that the male member does not know and can detect when a female is fertile, so he will try to maximize time with her in order to ensure fertilization. Another precopulatory method of cryptic female choice are anatomical barriers, such as the differences in genital morphology, which I will cover a bit later. On the postcopulatory side, we have sperm control, which includes both destruction, ejection, or storage of sperm, which can result in a choice of specific sperm or delayed insemination. For example, the aforementioned garter snakes can store sperm in order to fertilize themselves when the conditions are more favorable to the female. And sand lizard females will exhibit a storage of sperm as well, and choice. The female, through chemical pathways, will choose the sperm which is the least related to her, and this will this will mitigate the chances of inbreeding or breeding with a related specimen. As you can see, the female right here and the male of the sand lizard at the bottom left. An extreme example of sexual dimorphism can be seen in the order of bony fish called the anglerfish. This is a specimen that lives closer to the continental shelf, where there is more primary production going on in the ecosystem and there is more food in general. These anglerfish, which live closer to the surface, have this what you could colloquially call bait, or the esca, at the front of their mouth, which are modified fins of the back. And the bait usually takes the form of some kind of wiggly worm, as I've marked right here, and they will use it to attract prey. And the prey can see it because there is more light in the ocean. So this is different from the deep sea counterparts, where they use symbiotic bacteria in their esca to create light and attract other fish that way through this method. Another interesting thing is that those living closer to the surface exhibit a much less pronounced difference in sexual dimorphism, and the specimen right here is either a male or a female. We can't really tell from this picture right now, but you just have to know that the males are just a little bit smaller than the female. And also I need to mention that those living closer to the top of the continental shelf will actually mate for will have a faster mating ritual. They will attach for a few seconds, disperse both their sperm cells and the egg cells into the water, and hope that some will be fertilized. However, as we go deeper into the ocean, more closer to the abyssal zone where there is no light, as we go gradually towards that part, the anglerfish will start to mate for longer periods of time. The different kinds of species, to be precise, will mate for longer periods of time. This is because in these parts of the ocean, finding a mate is much harder than finding a mate closer to the surface. So these specimens have evolved a preference for mating for longer periods of time to ensure that fertilization is successful, because such copulation is the chance that copulation is much more rare. And this kind of behavior has led to an extreme development in deep sea anglerfish. So in this picture there are actually two animals. The most prominent one being an obvious anglerfish, as you can see by the esca at the front, and the other one is attached to the female. This is because in these deep sea environments, the chances of finding another mate are extremely low. So males have actually evolved to become extraordinarily reduced. As you can see in this picture, the male is this tiny little parasite looking fish that's attached to the female. And as soon as the males hatch, they will be completely sexually developed, and their mouths are actually incapable of feeding. You know, they also like the famous eska, or the bait, like the fishing rod of the angler fish. So they're pretty much just reduced to organisms with an enhanced sexual reproductive system and smelling ability. They will try and find a female as fast as possible because they are incapable of feeding. And as soon as they see a female, they will bite into her stomach, and using specialized enzymes in their mouth, they will actually dissolve the tissue at the cellular level, and fuse into the female, connecting the blood vessels into themselves. And they will therefore live on as a chimeric being which has two genomes in itself. This is possible because the female's immune system is slightly reduced, so it can accept such a foreign body into its own system. And we can see that because of this system, the female exhibits sperm choice and sperm control of the males, because multiple males can attach to the female, and she can choose to either inseminate herself later, sooner, or when the conditions are most profitable, and she can choose through chemical pathways the best male. Moving over to the anatomical differences, as I've mentioned before, in the species of duck Anas patyrhynchos, you can see on the picture on the left the comparison of the male penis and the female vagina, which both have evolved to be very complex structures as a result of a sexually antagonistic coevolution, because the male's interests are different from the female's interests. The male will try to force itself on the female, and the female has developed ways to counter this. Their vagina is shaped like a corkscrew, like a labyrinth, in order to make insemination or copulation harder for the male. However, the male has also evolved a corkscrew penis, which allows it to better mate with such females. So over the course of evolution, their genital structures have become very complex. And this can be explained by the fact that females might be subtly selecting for more, how should I say, favorable subtle traits of the male penis, which makes copulation easier. In this section of the presentation, I will go throughout the fossil record. By now, you should have noticed that from the examples I've given in the family of birds of paradise, that feathers are quite important in sexual selection. An argument used by creationists to criticize Darwin's theory of sexual selection, or natural selection, I should say, is that, for example, in the evolution of a wing, how could a wing have evolved if, in order to reach a wing, there should have been an intermediary stage where the wing wasn't functional, like all of these stages here? Well, this might seem like a good criticism, because these wings could not support flight, and they made the arms less functional at other things, for example, manipulation of food or other uses of arms. However, there is a growing body of evidence that suggests that the early feathers on the wings of early bird ancestors actually served for sexual selection purposes and thermoregulation, along with other communication purposes. In recent years, more and more fossils are being identified which have preserved feathers and even some organelles called melanosomes inside of them, which are organelles used for the synthesis and storage of melanin pigments, which give the feathers their color. Along this fact, coupled along with the fact of the very diversity of the feathers found, indicates that these feathers had a signaling function. These functions could include sexual communication or communication of danger. Iridescent feathers, very shiny feathers, have actually been found on species of Microraptor, and even some color patterns have been recovered from species of Sinosauropteryx and Anchiornis huxley. A recently published paper discussing the discovery of type 1 feathers on a certain pterosaur species discusses the possibility that the early genetic framework required for melanosome diversity has been established in the early diverging specimens of Ave metatarsalia right here. And these genes were later activated at different points in the evolution of Ave metatarsalans, which includes the modern birds. There has been a Microraptor specimen discovered in China, which has very pronounced flight feathers preserved. And the analysis of melanosomes from an electron microscope has concluded that it had iridescent feathers. From pictures A to E, we have examples of melanosomes in an extant living species of birds. The melanosomes are these orb-like structures you can see on the electron microscope of different points on the feathers of these birds. And their different geometries result in different colors that the birds have. And here on picture F, you can see the indentation of melanosomes left by fossilization. And we can conclude from this both the color and even the fact that Microraptor had iridescent feathers. In the preserved melanosomes from the tail of feathers of Sinosauropteryx, an electron microscope analysis concluded that this species actually had a pattern of feathers on its tail, of very simple type 1 feathers. As you can see on picture A is a fragment of the tail, and picture C is the electron microscope view where you can see the indentation of these melanosomes. Similarly, on a specimen of Anchiornis huxley, we can see on different points of the wings different types of geometries of the melanosomes, which the scientists then managed to conclude that it had different patterns on its wings of different colors and shapes. As I've mentioned before, a recent discovery that a pterosaur species of Tupandactylus imperator also had these differing melanosome geometries on its feathers prompted the idea that in early diverging Ave metatarsalans, the genetic framework ready for such a diversification of color was already well prepared there, but activated later. This study also found that Tupandactylus imperator had a row of type 1 feathers on the back of its crest, right here. It should be noted that the picture on the left is more accurate, while the picture on the right was placed in order to show you the scale of the animal and its bodily morphology. But it should be noted that the picture on the left is much more accurate based on recent discoveries. Tian Yulong is a species of ornithischian dinosaur which has been discovered to have a row of type 1 feathers on its back. This is interesting because the ornithischian lineage ironically named the bird-hipped lineage because of their hip morphology and anatomy being similar to that of modern birds. They are actually not the lineage of dinosaurs that evolved into birds, but it was the Saurischans or the lizard-hipped dinosaurs that later evolved into birds. This discovery further solidifies the idea that early feathers could have evolved for either thermal regulation purposes or sexual communication, for example. Finally, very strong evidence for the development of feathers as a form of sexual display function is from a species of Ornithomimus edomonticus, which is a Saurisian theropod dinosaur. A discovery was made that the adult members had incisions of feathers in their bones. These feathers are pennaceous, which are in modern birds, these types of feathers are used for flight. However, due to the bodily morphology of Edomonticus, these feathers could not have in any way been used for flight. And because of their very specific arrangement on the bones, they also could not have been used for thermoregulation. And additionally, because of the fact that young, sexually immature Ornithomimus edomonticus were all found to lack these arm feathers, it has been concluded that in the adult Ornithomimus, they must have been used for communication purposes, which includes both sexual communication, similar to modern ostriches. In this picture, we see a reconstruction of a juvenile Ornithomimus and an adult Ornithomimus with fully developed ornamentation of feathers on its forelimbs. Thank you for your attention, and these are my sources.